Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. It is June 22nd, 2015. I've been having some issues with connectivity on the internet, so hopefully, cross our fingers, we'll get a good connection throughout the broadcast this evening. So tonight's webinar was actually recommended to us by some therapists in the past. So this is a recreation of that webinar. But what I've also taken in tonight's slides is some quotes and ideas from family members who have gone through a family visit and also from our therapists who have hosted family visits. So it has some perspective and principles from people who have been through it, as well as some of the thoughts and ideas that I have that I want to share with you tonight. Let's talk about a philosophy. And one of the things that we have done in the wilderness therapy industry is really change the way that families are involved in treatment and created a really robust parent curriculum and experience for parents along with their children. And while it was easier in the early days of wilderness therapy, because you didn't involve the family and the real-time problems and challenges, we were doing a great disservice in this field, in the field of wilderness therapy. So what we decided to do when we started our program was increase and infuse a lot more family support. So we think about it as if every family is a candidate to come out to the wilderness during their child's stay, and maybe even more than once in the middle and at the end. So that's where that comes from. It's not always the case that it's recommended, but on the outset, our bias is to believe that everybody's a candidate for that. And really, when it comes down to why and who should do that, there are a lot of things that go into it. Probably the only one, and I've thought about this question for a long time, the only one that we really don't consider or don't put a lot of weight on in terms of recommending a family visit is if it's just because everybody misses each other. While that tugs at the heartstrings and is an important piece of the family strength and love and commitment to each other, that's not necessarily clinically the best reason for it to happen. So aside from that, we can think of almost any good reason to have a child have their family come out and visit the program. Oftentimes the parents will ask about it, and I think even in our curriculum we've added this piece where you ask your Evoke therapist about it. And the reason we have you do that is not because we believe that they're all going to say yes. In fact, where we have it situated in the curriculum, it's really too early for most people. But we want you to hear about the intentionality behind the parent visit. Sometimes we think of it, or maybe historically it was first thought of as a reward for a child, young adult, or adolescent child engaging in the program and accepting it and cooperating to a certain extent, at least to the extent that we didn't believe that their parent visit was going to be a stage for them to mistreat or abuse their parents. At least we thought they were at that point that the visit was going to be productive and different in some way than interactions had been in the past. But there are other reasons, other things to consider. It's not just that simple. It's not just simply a reward. Sometimes there's a piece of stagnation that occurs, that nothing else can push or unstick the child except for a family visit. Maybe the parents are triggers. Maybe that relationship was the defining reason why they were sent to Evoke therapy programs. And so for those kinds of reasons, we'll have one or both parents come out to the field and visit. Sometimes we're talking about working on family dynamics, family work, and although you can do some of that through letter, and I think I've said this, I think letter writing is my favorite form of family therapy. It's some of the most deliberate and intentional family therapy that I've ever been a part of. But there's something that can happen in real time that's more difficult. It's not easier. A lot of the students and clients will talk about it being easier, but it's not easier and not even close. Sometimes it's good to have one parent visit or the other because you're trying to focus on specific issues as it relates to that parent and child relationship. Sometimes the parents aren't on the same page enough that they're willing to, I should say, they're not willing to be vulnerable in front of each other. And so having a parent out sharing and doing their work in the face or with another parent is not really a viable or not an appropriate clinical option. So having one parent out or another could be indicated at some times. Sometimes it's a good substitute for a transition visit. I think historically, again, as we created this new version of wilderness therapy 18 years ago, the idea was that parents would come out for the graduation, or we called it the transition. But sometimes that's such a vulnerable period of time that to come out a week or two or three prior to that still accomplishes many of the same things, but doesn't introduce challenging family dynamics at a vulnerable point in treatment. Also, for young adults, some of our therapists for young adults will say that they want that transition period as they go on to the next setting to be an opportunity for their client to own it more. And so having the parent come out before that transition or exit date would be appropriate, still accomplishing a lot of the same things, but really putting the child, making the child, in this case the young adult child, responsible for signing up for the next program and really owning that. I like those substitutions for a transition in times when I think everybody's heart is in it, but they're overwhelmed by the risk, or they're overwhelmed by the stress of it. I've had students, and I've told this story many times, I've had many students come to me and say, my visit with my parents, my transition specifically, transport with my parents, was more difficult than I ever imagined. One time, I had a father and son come back to the office after leaving for 15 minutes, and everything disintegrated in the car. The most amazing thing about this story, because you can imagine that happening in some cases, was it was the student himself, my adolescent student, who said, I don't know what came over me. And he felt as defeated by his behavior as the father felt disappointed in the experience. And so we took him back in, and then we made the transport. We drove him to the next program. So substituting for a transition visit can be very appropriate. It has all of the benefits of reunion and engaging in family work without the risk or the deadline. Sometimes people need to plan far enough. I'll oftentimes say, let's schedule your visit for July 15th. I don't know at this point if that's going to be a transition date, because we're still, you and I, all of us, are still working out some of the details. We don't know if that's going to be an opportunity for you to celebrate how far he or she has come, or if it's going to be simply an opportunity to do some more family work. But we can still schedule it. And then what it becomes will be defined by the week that the child and the family is having at that time. So I've been able to do it that way and be able to solve a lot of the challenges of visits, timing, scheduling, but also accomplishing flexibly what needs to be accomplished with it. There's such a thing as a short visit or a boundary visit. We have historical, on occasion, have parents come out for less than an hour. Almost all of the time that has been intentional. But there's even been some cases when the parent came out to the field and they were there for just a little while, maybe a couple of hours, and they decided to hold a boundary and walk away. Now that can be devastating emotionally for a mother and a father, or a mother and a father. But I will tell you that whenever I talk about this, and a few come to mind, those have been some of the most meaningful visits that have added more to the therapeutic process than any other visit, or maybe anything else in that child's stay at our program. So coming out for a short visit, coming out to say no in person, coming out to draw a line in the sand about what you can or can't support with a young adult, or saying to an adolescent, you can't come home yet, and having them experience that face to face, that can be helpful. And that can be just as powerful, although it can be difficult, especially if we didn't anticipate that on the front end. And there have been occasions when that has happened. Like I said, ask your therapist why or why not. Not from the standpoint of, why aren't you doing this because this should be happening, but tell me about your philosophy. Tell me what would lead you to think that a visit would be a good idea, or not so great idea. So I can understand, again, the intention behind it. In the early days, it never happened to wilderness therapy before we started our programs. There was no such a thing as a parent visit during the program, let alone phone calls or satellite calls. None of those existed. And then we introduced them the minute we started our first program. And now it's much more common. In fact, it seems to be the default in many places. But there was this early discussion I had with one professional where she told me, I don't really like these mid-program visits, especially when they're coupled with an end-of-program visit, because it seems to be anticlimactic, right? My students and my parents come out and they have this excited, wonderful reunion experience. After not having seen each other, they appreciate the growth and the change, and they talk about that. And then they come back just a few weeks later, and it's kind of anticlimactic. And when she first gave me that feedback or presented this idea to me, at first I was just defensive because something about it felt right. But then I realized she was right. There is an anticlimax to the 2-visit system that we were creating. But then I realized this right away. That's a good thing. I think in the old days, I know this in the old days because I worked in them. In the old days of wilderness therapy, we really patted ourselves on the back and really basked in the enjoyment of the reunion at the end of the program that parents and children have. But that's not real life, right? Real life is a Tuesday. Real life is when you've been together more often. And just because we could contrive this sort of climactic experience for everybody because they haven't seen each other, didn't mean that we were getting to some of the deeper work. So sometimes, when it's appropriate, when it's possible, the multi-visit program, the multi-visit structure for families and wilderness students is very effective at getting to what is more real, more deep, and less just the rush of it. I have a picture here of a reunion. You'll definitely experience some of that, but it's not all about reunion. If you come expecting just a reunion, then you're likely going to fall into some common pitfalls. So come expecting to work. Come expecting to not finish and solve everything, but to ask some difficult questions and to listen to some difficult things and to feel some uncomfortable feelings and to try and stretch and try new ways of interacting. Parents that come with that, instead of just the idea of the celebration of reunion, walk away in most all cases being very happy about their visit. Parents that come that expect to just celebrate the reunion usually walk away very disappointed because, or they don't get a lot of work done because it's hard when you're basking in the celebration spirit to go into difficult things. I have parents tell me all the time, I just wanted it to be a good time. I didn't want to talk about anything uncomfortable. And of course, that's not really what almost all of these visits are for and about. The family, these are some quotes from some therapists and some families. The family should be prepared, for example, to know that the therapist might be recommending that the parents come out for a very short period of time for the sole purpose of reinforcing the intervention. Family comes out and says, we are in full cooperation with the program following their recommendations. We are not bringing you home. We are here to show you that we are a unified front, that we won't be split any longer, etc., etc. Then they would leave within a couple of hours or less. So that's one therapist's suggestion and idea. Having knowledge of such outlier visits will help the family swallow that visits are variable and do not always look like spending a full connected day with their child, and that such visits, these outlier visits, often have equal though different benefits. So we try to be intentional about it, even if the intention is let's just see what's going on in the family, let's reintroduce everybody and see what the dynamics are. That's the intention, right? You're still doing it to find something out, to learn something, to assess something. I think emphasizing the point that field visits aren't scheduled simply because parents miss their children or children miss parents will be important to emphasize. When visits are indicated, there is a strong reason beyond just wanting the visit propelling the intention. So almost all the visits that I've ever had have been wonderfully powerful and effective at pushing forward or moving forward the therapeutic agenda, whatever that agenda is. But like I said earlier, I get my heartstrings tugged when I hear parents talk about missing their children. But in the scope of things, this is a relatively short period of time. And what we know about wilderness therapy is that it is the distance of wilderness therapy that creates the possibility, the foundation for a better connection. Simple as that. The distance that is inherent in wilderness therapy is the foundation of creating greater connection, greater awareness, better communication, even more affection in many ways. Let them lead. Emphasize that it is about joining your child's experience. It's a chance to work through with other clients and with the field staff more than it is a family intensive with me. I like to talk about letting their kids be the experts and using this as a chance to learn from their kids both hard and soft skills. So again, this is another therapist perspective and insight that they would have you know and offer to you. It would be helpful to talk about the value of the visits even when they go bad and give a picture of how and what they can look like. Also, I'd appreciate it if you talk briefly about the reasons why a therapist may not recommend it for a particular family. Enmeshment, individuation, strong manipulation patterns. I think this will help parents have a more balanced perspective and perhaps come better prepared when they do a visit. So, like I said, if the enmeshment, if the manipulation, if the volatility, if the reactiveness is still so raw, we might not recommend that. And in some cases, especially with adolescents, if they haven't turned the corner significantly enough that they're willing to approach a visit with parents in a way to make use of it instead of just to repeat old patterns and badger and guilt and threaten and intimidate and be mean to them, to be cruel to them. If it's just going to be about those things, we're not going to recommend it. So again, the intention behind the no visit is to create a stronger foundation for everybody, better communication, better acceptance, better respect, tools to be able to communicate difficult feelings, a better ability on everybody's part to be able to listen to each other without reacting, all of those things. Empathy and connection. Empathy for the student, stress of being away from home, desire to return to friends, autonomy, and family. This is part of what is okay to offer your student, your child, whether young adult or adolescent. And it doesn't necessarily need to compromise your resolve to this intervention. And part of the family visit can really get you accustomed to that, right? See what it's like, to feel what it's like. Just a spoonful of what they're going through, and create or increase empathy and understanding. A lot of parents, and this is why we've created our family intensives and our parent intensives, a lot of parents after being in the field for half a day have said, I want to do this, can you do this for us? And that's why we've created those. But it can also give you some empathy for some of the difficult pieces. Most parents are thrilled with the progress of their child, but their celebration is often dampened by the very real emotional challenges of their child's current circumstances. Most parents are afraid to process for fear of relapse. Some seem to believe that after a handful of higher functioning weeks, that real desires and temptations will virtually be eliminated. It's a small box, folks. It's a very, very small box. And most of our clients and students thrive, or at least do significantly better than they have been doing recently. And even though that is the case, and even though that's what I fell in love with when I was introduced to wilderness therapy, it's important to know that there still are triggers, that there still are tendencies and propensities to go back into old behaviors. That these patterns that are now literally a part of the brain structure have years of history in them. And that this intervention isn't going to reverse that. And it's not going to eliminate the desire or the temptations, even though they might have the tools to resist it. And I think parents get disappointed because they don't want their child to even feel the old ways, or be tempted by the old things, or even be ambivalent about certain things. And that can be challenging for them, but they're allowed to have that. And it does require parents to consistently and continually hold a boundary, even though the child doesn't like it. Empathy for the student and thorough assertive communication with a heavy emphasis on reflections and questions rather than lectures goes a long way towards facilitating a more open process and emotional connection. So you will have the opportunity, and relatively speaking, your child is an expert at communication by this point. They really are, at least in terms of the skill. Their want or willingness to use it might be limited, but their ability to use it is incredibly high by the time that you're going to have a visit with your child. And so you're going to practice that, and I'll talk about that in a few moments. You're going to practice and get prepared so that once you step into this culture, and you'll watch it and see it all around you with their peers and with the staff and even with them, that you'll have some foundation, some background to be able to match at least a part of it. Study the communication model. Study the communication webinar. Specifically learn about I feel statements and reflective listening. And it's okay to bring a little cheat sheet or to write it down on a piece of paper. There's no test to this. We're not trying to have you memorize. We're just trying to have you practice it. And in the moment when emotions become tense or difficult, it's likely to escape you. So it's okay to write it down. But study the communication webinar. Study the I feel statement and reflective listening. There's a webinar on the parent meeting. You can look at that. Or if you've attended one of our parent meetings with Dr. Goddard, and soon to come at our Cascades program, if you've attended one of those meetings at Entrada Cascades, that can be a good foundation for you because they practice those communication skills. We want all of our families to go to one of those meetings if at all possible. Obviously, if you've been to one of the parent intensives or family intensives, then you're going to have that kind of education and background because it's practiced there over several days. Specifically, the Bachelor's of Arts of Communication is a document that we have that you can look at. It's also now one of the chapters in my book on tools for connection for your children. It really does go over and outline the different skills and communication beyond the I feel statement and reflective listening. Sometimes the child is surprised by the visit, that is by design, and sometimes they're prepared for the visit. I would fluctuate. I would say 50-50. Sometimes it was just a gut. Sometimes I had real specific ideas or intentions by why I did it one way or the other. Sometimes I would tell them the night before. Sometimes I would tell them the morning of. Sometimes the child had such a difficult time being in the moment, I wouldn't tell them at all, and there would be some kind of surprise where a parent would be led into a group. And we had all kinds of fun variations where the children were out collecting wood, and when they came back to the fire, their parent was there. One time I did this intervention where the children were out collecting wood or doing something, and I put tarps over two parents. It was actually two fathers. And then I had them sit in the middle of the circle, so when all of the students came back, we circled around, and I had all of the students talk to these two people that were covered up as if it was their parent. And what they didn't know was that, of course, it was two of theirs. It was two separate fathers. Then we spent the day with the fathers. And it was, you try to create interventions that are meaningful for everybody. You'll be a sort of proxy for other parents, right? They'll ask you questions. They're asking about your situation with your child, but they're also asking by proxy about their own families, about how they feel about it. They'll ask you about your work. They will put you on the spot. That's almost always the case, is that at some point you'll be put on the spot to talk vulnerably, to talk openly about your feelings, because that's the culture that they're used to. And that can be difficult for some parents. They can be challenged by that. By the end, you'll feel much more comfortable. It'll feel healing in almost all cases. And you'll have this increase in courage and ability to do that. But that's part of what can happen. Sometimes we introduce, like I said, by ceremony. Sometimes it's a student-led initiative where they've created it for you and they created something meaningful, and we do that on the back end also. There are times when we're going to ask you to be involved in group activities and even group therapy. There are times when you're going to have a session with the therapist and the staff. There's times that are going to be unsupervised. And all of this is in a mix in a way so that we can get and help you get a feel for how your child and you are doing in different contexts. If you get overwhelmed when you're being unsupervised, you can call the staff or the therapist over. You can come to a point that feels like an impasse and then save it for the therapist visit later. Again, you can ask the therapist about specific assignments or goals. Some therapists have, for different families, have you work on specific things before you come out. Ask about gear and conditions, and we provide you information about that. And when it's time to go, this almost sounds a little bit cold, but don't linger. Like, say your goodbye, hug, grieve, say your I love yous, and move on. And some parents have a difficult time in that ending process. Here's a picture of a mother and a son talking. This is what it's going to look like for some of you when they're out there visiting. Some do's and don'ts. Come prepared to work. And I think I've already made that point clear. The parents who come prepared to work usually walk away feeling very enriched by the process. Those who come to celebrate often walk away disappointed. Let go of expectations or agenda outside of whatever the basic, idea is, intention is. Know that a lot of what happens in wilderness therapy is going to be mirrored on your visitor during your visit, which is we don't know how they're going to react. They don't even know how they're going to react. We don't know what issues will have come up that day or the day before, right? Even if we talk to you just a few days before, new things can arise. There can be weather. There can be other student issues. I remember one time I had a student who just entered the program and tried to run away from the program right in the middle of our family session. And we actually went over and talked to him after a while, after he de-escalated. And the father, in this case, was asking him a lot of questions. It was actually helpful and healing for everybody in that situation, but we didn't set that up at all. Students have reactions that I think parents wish we had prepared them for, and we don't necessarily know what they're going to have or how they're going to react all the time. Bring up the tough stuff. This is the best time to practice talking about some difficult topics. And you have the support. You have a little bit of autonomy and freedom, but you also have the support, the safety net to be able to get help if it starts to go off course. Please follow the rules that you're asked to. Parents will try to sneak in contraband, food, treats, things like that. We ask you not to, and please don't do that. It undermines the whole process of therapy. It teaches your students, your child, and clients, it teaches them that the rules don't apply to them, and reinforces that idea that they're terminally unique in this situation. Be present and engage in the wilderness experience. It's going to be uncomfortable at times. It's going to be raw. You are going to feel vulnerable, and we ask you to feel that, to deal with it the same way we ask the students to. If you need to emote, or your child for that matter needs to emote, go ahead and do it. Don't try to talk them out of it. Tell them to look on the bright side. Tell them to look at the positive. Just let them feel it. Bring sunglasses, a water bottle, and any weather relevant gear that you have. We can provide it. Anything that you don't have for you, we provide food for you, and we'll provide you a field chair. You can refill your water bottles once you get out to the field. Please be conservative with jewelry, makeup, perfume. Leave your cell phone in the car, turned off. We don't want you to use your car as a locker, so we're going to ask you to have a bag to be able to get everything to the site. It's only usually a few 100 feet to a few 100 yards of a walk, not very far at all, but we ask you not to use your car as this locker to go back to. Like I said, don't come to celebrate, come to work. Don't be careful and try to make it a nice and a pleasant visit. You're not going to intentionally make it uncomfortable, but it's okay to talk about difficult things. Don't bring gifts. You don't have to compensate for anything. Being in the program is gift enough. You being there is gift enough. Avoid talking about future information unless your therapist has designed that to be a part of the process. So if future information comes up, just simply say, I'm not comfortable talking about this. I want to wait to talk about this with a therapist during their visit. You don't have to solve everything. Try to get into some things, but give yourself permission to, like I said, take a time out and wait until the therapist or the staff can be present. Don't rescue them from their feelings. A lot of parents will, when children cry or they're sad or they're homesick or they're eager to leave, will try to, like I said, talk them out of it. Tell them to look on the bright side. Try to comfort them instead of just saying, I hear you. Thanks for telling me. I can imagine. I'm glad that you're talking about it. While accepting coaching from the staff and from the therapist, it's not about getting it right. So many parents get overly anxious and afraid that they're going to say something wrong. Just be natural. We'll coach you. We'll take care of it. If we feel like there's something in communication that we need to coach, it's necessary to coach, we'll do it. So you don't have to. I mean, you can think about the skills and the tools that you've been taught and introduced to, but if it gets to the point where you're so afraid and blocked that you're not talking and you're avoiding a lot of things, that's when it's out of balance. It's too far on the other end of the continuum. Some frequently asked questions that parents have asked us. What should be our number one focus during an interim field visit? Like I said, I think it's just family work. I think it's the real-time version of the letters, and there can be a specific item that the therapist has in mind for you. Ask him if there is that, or if it's just generally family relationships and communication. I'm so afraid I will say the wrong thing, and I know that leaving my son to head home will be hard for me. All I can say is I've already talked about the being so afraid, but leaving will be hard for your son or for your daughter or for you. And it's okay. Nothing is broken when somebody is hurt or sad. That's a sign that there's love, that there's caring, and that there's connection. And I think I know I do this, and I know a lot of parents, we try to avoid or take away or not feel those things. And we can't have love without hurt. We can't have love without sadness. We can't have connection without the sadness of the times that we're not together. He's doing well, and I want to make sure that I reinforce the positive aspects of his time at Evoke. Again, you don't need to be so careful that you're avoiding talking about everything. But it's important to know that this process is for you, but also to underscore your commitment, your resolve to this entire process. And so live the rules, be in the moment, be present, let go of what's going on at home, don't talk about the future, and work on, it's a rare time, really a rare time to be able to talk about this. Take home, it's for connection, reconnecting, it's practice, it's kind of a dress rehearsal with enough of a safety net that if it does get off track that you have support there. It's okay if it goes badly. What we say about these types of things, and this is not the only thing we say about it, is good visits are good and bad visits are good. Because bad visits or difficult visits can teach us and you and the child as much powerful, important information as a visit that goes smoothly. You're going to learn from the group. You're going to learn some things about communication. You're going to learn some things about children, learn some things about parenting from the group. And like I said, it can be vulnerable. Really, it can be vulnerable. And for people that don't want to talk about feelings or difficult topics in front of people, that's going to be a challenge, and you should share that with your therapist. Dealing with no FI, and dealing just with, for you and for them, just dealing with being able to say at any point in any conversation, I don't want to talk about this right now. And I think we don't give ourselves permission to do that. I know that's true. A lot of parents feel handcuffed as if they have to answer everything or lie about it. And there's another alternative, which is, I don't want to talk about it right now. And that might make you uncomfortable. And I'm going to tolerate your discomfort, but I'm not going to talk about it. Understand what you can and can't control. Like I said, weather. When I was out in the field, even though I was a wilderness therapist for 10 years before my son went to wilderness therapy, I was frustrated with the weather, with the rain. And that became my own learning process. But we can't control that. That becomes a part of it, just like it does for them. Issues that we didn't anticipate were issues often come up. Children have their reaction after the visit. Right? They have their reaction after the visit, and that can be difficult, grieving, sad, frustration, homesick. All of those things can be a side effect of the visit, but that's okay. That's what we're doing here. We're teaching them how to feel, right? Which really is a way of saying teaching them to allow feelings to be there and learning new ways to cope with them. And then trust the process. Trust the process, and that what needs to happen will happen. Let your therapist guide the visit and be open to new directions. It can be a powerful investment in changing the family dynamics. Another quote from one of our parents who went through this process. So, all right, I am open for any live questions, topic related. I'll go through after these. I'll go through announcements, and then I'll address questions on any topic at the end of the webinar, or topic related questions. But if you have any topics related to, any questions related to the topic of field visits, I'm happy to take those now. None so far. I'll come back to that. This is the workshop that we would like everybody to go to. Oh, that just happened, so I'll have to delete that. We'll have to schedule the new one. Hopefully some of you were at that. The next family intensive, which is a 6-day intensive, July 20th through the 25th, by popular request. This is our first one ever. I'll be hosting that at Entrada on the 25th. Anybody, really 13 is probably the youngest age. You can have more than one child with us. You contact Stephanie at evoketherapy.com for more information, or go to our page, our programs page and our intensives page for more information. Here's our Pursuits program. This is young adult, sober, high adventure program that we have. Fun, sober fun, a recharge, a refresh. Here are some of the upcoming parent support groups. I'll be both in the Bay Area and in Los Angeles for these, and then I'm going to be scheduling some in Chicago, DC, and the Northwest. I know I'll be back in New York in mid-August. We would like families to attend 6 of these meetings while their child is with us. Doesn't matter if your child doesn't have drug or alcohol issues. We would like you to attend 6. All you have to do is replace alcohol or drugs with harmful or self-harming or self-sabotaging behaviors, and you have the same exact kind of dynamic. Follow us on social media so you can keep up with announcements and special articles and inspiring stories. Here's my book, which is really based on the parent curriculum and the teaching of these webinars. Ideally, if you buy a book about parenting or self-help and you buy it from the Parent Alumni Foundation page, including my book, then 10% of the proceeds go to the charity to help families who can't afford treatment to afford treatment. The next webinar will be tomorrow evening on fears and insecurities. That is both an assignment for the child, the young adult or adolescent child, but also one for the parents, and I'll talk about that and the dynamic around it. So I'm happy for any questions on any topic, Stephanie, if any have come up. A 6-day parenting seminar seems like a long time. Can a field visit be incorporated with the workshops? Absolutely. It's not a 6-day parenting intensive. It's a 4-day parenting intensive, really 3 nights. So that's the heroic parenting. The heroic journeys family intensive is going to be multifamily. So 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 person to a family, and we'll get a few of those families together. I'll keep the group under 15, and then we're going to be doing multiple activities. It's not going to be all talk therapy. There's going to be some primitive living and camping. It's going to be like you're being led by guides in a wilderness program, and you're all clients at the same time. And then we'll do some psychodrama, some role playing, some medium level adventure stuff, and some mindfulness stuff. So that's why the longer one really gives you a flavor of what it's like to be a wilderness client as a family. And you'll get to work through some difficult issues, but it won't all be talk therapy. It'll be just like our program, which is the therapy is the experience itself. And you can combine it. All of the heroic parenting and heroic journeys intensives can be combined with a parent visit. So can the parent workshop. Talk to your therapist about appropriate timing. And somebody asked this, none of these parent intensives or family intensives or individual intensives that we're also running now, none of these have to be associated with an Evoke client. So it could be if you know somebody who's not an Evoke client or doesn't have an Evoke client, but they want to do some of this intensive work, they're welcome to do it also. How often do siblings attend visits in the field? Are they recommended? Typically, no. So that's the default answer, no. Siblings are not invited. There can be exceptions, and your therapist can talk about that, but you should expect to hear the answer no. It takes long enough time to catch them up to speed that we end up spending so much time on the sibling that we don't really get to supporting and discussing the client themselves or the student themselves. And so they become overwhelmed, and we spend a lot of time instructing, keeping them up to speed, slowing it down, explaining it, and that just becomes difficult or challenging. I've done it in my 1,000, 1,100 client caseload that I've had. I've done it a handful of times where a sibling was out, but it was very intentional, and they were a little bit older usually. And again, we had a specific reason, and we felt comfortable with it. So, but they can do the family therapy intensive heroic journeys for sure. Do both parents come for a visit? Sometimes both. Sometimes one or the other. And again, that's going to be probably, you could guess at what that would be for you. Sometimes step parents will come. What we do ask is that if you're going to be involved in a parent visit, that you're involved on the weekly phone calls and with the rest of the parent curriculum. Because again, we don't want to catch you up, spend the entire visit catching you up. So if you're involved in the child's life, if you're involved in the weekly phone calls, if you're involved in the webinars and doing the curriculum, then most likely you're going to be invited. If parents can work together, that's the default. They come at the same time. But there's been situations where, even for scheduling reasons, maybe children at home and difficulty with childcare, where I brought parents out separately, and that can be very, very powerful. One cool thing that you'll know about this, you'll hear about this implied, is that if you can imagine now, many of our groups are having parent visits every week. Because if there's 8 or 9 clients or students in a group, and they're having beginning and or end of program visits, you can imagine that there's parents in the field most weeks. And that's a very rich source of information for all of our students, even if it's not their parent visit. Because what we know about group work is that we learn and get as much out of other people's work when we're watching it as we do when we're doing our own piece of work in this process. So parents are a very common sighting in our field areas. Does the child come out of the group during a family intensive, or is the family intensive done at another time? Well, this is our first one, so I suppose we could do it either way. That would be my answer. I would make sure that it was okay with the therapist, but we could do it either way. Since there's no precedent, and I get to make up the rules as we go along, we'll follow what really has been our legacy, our history, which is if it's clinically indicated, if it's clinically beneficial, if we consider it that way, then we'll do it either way. I was typically thinking of it not having it that way, but I can imagine pulling a child out of a group, putting him into a family intensive, and then putting him back into a group. That could be really powerful also, for sure. Thanks for asking. Didn't even think about that question. Do you know if the fears assignment is shared with my daughter, or is that just a reflection for me? It's unclear on the assignment log. You get to choose. That's the answer. You get to choose. We want you to write it. We want you to share it with at least one other person, but you don't have to share it with your child. Talk with your therapist, your child's therapist, about any fears you might have about sharing this assignment with your child, and see if any of those can be resolved. Or if you still feel strong about it, of course, we're going to support the boundary. You don't have to share it with anybody in this process. A lot of parents are afraid that these kinds of things would be used against them. I've learned in my own experience and in watching others that they can't use it against you if you don't let them. Meaning that to use an insecurity or a fear against you, they already had that capacity when it wasn't spoken, and speaking it out loud takes the power out of it. But the answer is you get to choose, and be clear about that with your therapist, and talk to them, him or her, about your concerns about that, so you can be heard in this process and take care of yourself. Can you say something about the drive out? The therapist mentioned renting a four-wheel drive vehicle. Will we break the rental agreement by taking the vehicle off road? I believe you will. I'm not positive about that, but that can be the case. So I wish I had a different answer than that, but I think that might be the case. Um, they're dirt roads. They're not extraordinarily precarious roads, but they're dirt roads. And mostly the four-wheel drive is for the clearance. We've been doing this now. I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and we've been doing it this way ever since we started doing field visits, which was probably about 16, 17 years ago, and we've never had a problem with it. But I can't take responsibility too much for that, and if that's the case, then you're going to have to sort that out. What is the fear? When is the fear assignment? I'll talk about it tomorrow night, so I'll actually I have to do some studying on it. I don't know when it is the fears and insecurities assignment. I don't know when it is listed. It'll pop up in your weekly curriculum that you have, and I'm not sure, but I'll find that out before I do the webinar tomorrow night. So I'm sorry I can't answer that right now. I would guess it's around week 4 or 5. Do you start the visit at the office, or do we have to drive out to the campsite ourselves? We start the visit out at the office. This isn't always the case, but we start at the office. You get welcomed. All of your gear is taken care of. You may meet the therapist. You may not. Somebody will then lead you out to the field. And then you'll have a map, but you'll oftentimes drive yourself out the field. Sometimes somebody will drive you out of the field. If you're very concerned about getting lost, you can be led both out and back. But you'll start off at the office and you end at the office, because you'll even if you bring a significant amount of gear, you're still going to want some of the food and gear that we provide for you. You also get to see office staff, the staff, some of our maps and logistics rooms, which can be pretty interesting. Thank you so much, folks. Thank you for your involvement and for your questions. Some great questions, and some of which I hadn't even considered. So I will see you all tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Mountain Time to talk about the fears and insecurities assignments, and also the principle and the ideas around fears and insecurities. Have a great 24 hours, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.